What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Today, we got a good one for you guys. In today's video, we're bringing back a series that we tried out a bit earlier in the offseason, where we went over the top realistic player to draft at every position. In this little experiment, we put together a rough starting roster based upon a realistic draft type scenario, meaning no, we weren't just choosing Christian McCaffrey, Patrick Mahomes, Devontae Adams, and Travis Kelce. No, we chose to select players you could realistically attain in drafts depending on your draft position. We'll also use this as a refresher for the RB anchor draft strategy that we support this upcoming season. And if you've been living under a rock or unaware what the RB anchor draft strategy is or have never heard of it, if you're not, I will link the video on the best draft strategy and add it in the description box below. All you have to do to get to that video is simply click on the link in the top right hand corner of your screen, but like I said, I will be giving you a refresher in this video as well. But before I do, just got to take a moment to thank you guys that are watching, viewing, and subscribing. And a special thanks to those of you who have been showing your support this entire offseason. Our channel has been growing immensely, especially as of late. We're inching closer and closer to our goal of 100k subscribers by the start of the NFL season. And with us now being under 5,000 subscribers away from meeting that goal, we have you to thank for it. With that being said, also want to take a moment to shout out and remind you guys that our draft packages are available now. They are completely loaded with more than enough information to help you win your league, secure that bag. So if you're somebody that got a late start to your research process, or maybe you just want to step your game up, our draft package is definitely the product for you. You'll gain access to our tier-based rankings, which include our sleepers, our targets, our busts. On top of that, you'll get our risk ratings, our player projections, video player breakdowns on the top 150 players, access to our private Discord community group, and more. You can gain access at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Link as always in the description box below. With that being said, it's time to hop over to our stat of the day. Yesterday's stat of the day was which running back had more than twice as many receiving yards as the next closest running back through the first 8 weeks of last season. The correct answer was actually Alvin Kamara. Congratulations to Trip Olgum, the first to get this right on YouTube. And a massive shout out to @NateTrotter4 on Twitter, who with this answer completed his 10th correct stat of the day question. That locks him into the Hall of Fame and also locks him into our upcoming subscriber league. But fear not, guys, we still do have open spots left. So with that, let's see who can get today's question correct. We're keeping it simple. Which wide receiver was the youngest player to catch a touchdown pass last season? Once again, that's which wide receiver was the youngest player to catch a touchdown pass last season. Leave your answer in the comment section down below. We'll be happy to let you know who wins in tomorrow's video. Without further ado though, it's time to hop right into the video, and the perfect place to start is to take a peek into what the results were the first time we made this video. Our goal heading into that video was to pick one player at each position, making sure that these picks could realistically be attained in fantasy drafts based on current ADP. The results though, at the top for running back, we had Cam Akers. Behind him, at wide receiver, DK Metcalf. Then moving over to the quarterback position, we had Dak Prescott. And then rounding it out at tight end, we chose Logan Thomas as a later round option. Now obviously, since that video was released, we have had some updates since training camp has now begun. We've had updates on players returning from injury like Dak Prescott, who initially seemed like it was very promising in his return. That didn't last long though. Dak Prescott sidelined with an injury. This has been noted to be an upper body injury, something that has been impacting his throwing motion. So unfortunately, the draft selection in Dak Prescott, that hasn't aged all that well. As far as we know though, Dak Prescott is still slated to begin the season as the starter. He is going to be a bit more limited in what type of snaps we can expect throughout the preseason as well as training camp. So overall, while he's not a player I'm avoiding, and I still do believe he has a ton of upside this season, especially with the roster he has, but needless to say, he's not going to make my list of my top draft targets making a perfect team this year. And the other player that certainly will be eliminated from that list is also Cam Akers, who we chose at running back. We all know at this point in the season that Akers did go down with an Achilles tear, which is going to hold him out for the entire 2021 season. Cam Akers, who was a player that you could draft in the back half of the first round, and with the strength of that LA Rams offense and his true workhorse ability and what we saw from him last season, he truly seemed like the whole package that could bring in a ton of upside as well as safety. With the injury though, and him being held out for the entire season, so Cam Akers, another one not going to make the list again this time. As for DK Metcalf, Logan Thomas, that remains to be seen. Maybe they'll make the list, we'll just have to wait and see. To make this as realistic as possible, I did want to highlight the draft position that I'm projected to be taking. That pick is going to be coming from the 7th draft spot, and the reason we chose it is because that is where the first player we're going to be drafting is is coming off the board based upon current ADP. After I would theoretically draft the player ranked 7th in ADP, the next pick for someone in a snake draft in that draft spot would be pick 18 overall. That means that the player that I end up selecting with my second overall pick would have to be somebody with an ADP outside of the top 18. This will then continue into the third and fourth round, selecting players with an ADP outside the top 31 and 42. And for full transparency, the ADP we're using in this video isn't going to be Underdog, which we typically use. It is going to be ESPN. The player who's coming off the board 7th overall in ESPN leagues currently is Ezekiel Elliott of the Dallas Cowboys, which clearly that's the player who I chose to take in the first round in this experiment. The reason I chose him, I've been pretty high on Ezekiel Elliott throughout this entire offseason, and we've been recently fielding a ton of questions on why the ADP of Ezekiel Elliott has began to rise. If you guys remember, at the earlier portion of the offseason, Ezekiel Elliott was a player who was looked at as somebody likely to fall out of the first round of fantasy drafts. Can you imagine heading into 2021 with Ezekiel Elliott in your RB2 slot? That just sounds absolutely bonkers, and people began to realize, even with Dak Prescott coming back and exiting with an injury, the ADP of Ezekiel Elliott has continued to rise because I believe people have come to the realization that a lot of his lack of success last season, it wouldn't be fair to fully put that blame on Ezekiel Elliott. One thing we know specifically about the running back position, even more so than any other position in the NFL, is it's heavily reliant on the team offense and team defense. Offensive line is also a major factor in running back production. You can't solely put the blame on an individual ability. You can't solely put the blame on the individual ability of the running back. A running back could be one of the most talented in the entire league, but put him behind a poor offensive line in a bottom 5 offense with a team that's playing from behind 2 scores in the third and fourth quarter, and you're likely not going to get solid production from that player either. Ezekiel Elliott in the past has proven to be a top 5 running back consistently, excluding last season where he finished as the RB9. In 2019 and 2018, he was able to maintain his top 5 running back status. The year before that, 2017, he did finish outside the top 10, but if you remember, he did miss 6 games due to suspension. So although he did finish outside of the top 10 running backs, if you're looking at fantasy points per game, Ezekiel Elliott still in that top 5 running back conversation. Then even looking to his rookie season, he finished as the RB2. So we're talking about a running back on a fantasy points per game basis that's been a top 5 running back in every season except for 2020. What was the main difference in 2020? Obviously, the offense. Ezekiel Elliott in the games where Dak Prescott was healthy and starting, he was putting up his typical production. Week 1, 27.7 fantasy points. Followed that up in week 2 against Atlanta, 22.2. In weeks 3, 4, and 5, he averaged 21 fantasy points, meaning we really didn't see his production take a dip until Dak Prescott went down with his injury. After that, though, Ezekiel Elliott's production was definitely inconsistent as well as on the low end. And while I'm not here to particularly blame Ezekiel Elliott, if you ask Elliott himself, he certainly puts the blame on himself, even coming into this season in much better shape than he was last year, trying to shed some extra pounds, be lighter on his feet, be quicker, because he did note feeling a bit slower and sluggish after coming down with COVID and returning from that illness. Now, with all that being said, I still do think Ezekiel Elliott is a strong pick where he's going in drafts. We actually have him ranked as the RB5, and with him coming off the board as the RB7 in ESPN leagues, that's a player that presents a value. It should go without saying, though, that we do have to monitor the health and availability of Dak Prescott for the start of this season, because with me confirming that Ezekiel Elliott's lack of production last season was heavily reliant on the health of Dak Prescott, and Dak Prescott currently injured right now, if Prescott's unavailable, I can't condone drafting Ezekiel Elliott as high as he's going in drafts. That said, I do fully believe Dak Prescott is going to return and start the season fully healthy. Let's just wish him a speedy recovery so we can all get paid dividends for drafting Ezekiel Elliott. I did specifically want to include Ezekiel Elliott because we have been fielding many questions about his ADP and the current rise. The way I see it, it's not so much of a rise, rather a reacclimation to where he should be going and should have been going throughout this entire offseason. And so long as Dak Prescott is not reported to be missing an extended period of time, I fully expect Ezekiel Elliott to remain in this particular draft spot. With our first pick now out of the way, this is a good time to remind you guys about the RB Anchor draft strategy. Typically with the RB Anchor draft strategy, we do want to get one of the top guys, being Dalvin Cook, Alvin Kamara, Christian McCaffrey. One of those guys we can really say confidently that they can carry the RB production for our team, enough so that they could cover any potential lack of production from our RB2 slot. We will of course make up for the overall lack of depth at running back by being strong in areas like quarterback and tight end. So with this RB Anchor strategy, we do want to get our one core running back, follow that up with particularly a top tight end a top quarterback and try to also mix in 1 to 2 top wide receivers in the process. With the next projected pick of somebody drafting from the 7th spot being the 18th overall draft pick, we're going to have to limit our player pool of selectable players from anybody with an ADP outside of the top 18. If I'm filtering out running back, clearly the top options at this point when it comes to ESPN ADP are wide receiver and tight end, and with the 2 tight ends being projected to be available with my next pick, there really is no point on reaching on them. That is the beauty of taking advantage of different platforms in their ADP. Darren Waller, George Kittle, 2 tight ends that on other platforms like Yahoo, Sleeper, and Underdog, these are players that you can't draft outside of the top 2 rounds. And interestingly enough, we did actually create a tool to help all of you guys out there that's completely free. It's on our website on the ADP tab. This actually will help you identify outliers within the different platforms. So if some player is projected to come off the board in the top 2 rounds in every other platform except for one, and you know in that one platform where they're undervalued, you can get them at a significant discount. Having that knowledge before your draft, heading into mock drafts and heading into your actual drafts can be a significant advantage over your opponents. Knowing a player will be available much later than they typically would on other platforms is going to give you a massive edge at sniffing out value, making sure not to overpay, and getting values that you typically wouldn't anywhere else. Like I mentioned though, that's completely free at our website. You don't need to be a member to access that. I definitely recommend checking that out, but jumping back to this second round, I definitely think the value is once again at the wide receiver position, and the 2 wide receivers that it's coming down to for us is DeAndre Hopkins and DK Metcalf. DK Metcalf, a prime example of a player who made this list last time we made the video, and while he was selected as the lone winner last time, when it comes to this video, I will leave the choice up to you, DeAndre Hopkins or DK Metcalf. Me personally, you know that I am slightly in favor of DK Metcalf. Nothing against DeAndre Hopkins. I believe if you value safety when it comes to week-to-week consistency, DeAndre Hopkins is definitely going to be the better player of the 2. He's also a proven producer, even on a first year in a new offense. He was already producing top 5 wide receiver numbers. There is reason to believe that he could even take a step forward this season as the chemistry develops between him and Kyler. We also knew that Kyler Murray did have a shoulder injury, which did impact the overall upside and production we saw from DeAndre Hopkins down the stretch. That should be null and void heading into this season. Another reason in favor of DeAndre Hopkins to potentially improve upon his numbers from last year. As for DK Metcalf, this is a player heading into his 3rd season, the potential breakout season, and from the progression we've seen from him from year 1 in his rookie year, 100 total targets, converting that into 900 receiving yards, even scoring 9 times as a rookie. Very impressive numbers. Even still, that was nothing compared to what he did in his sophomore season, with just 29 more total targets, going from 100 total to 129, jumping from 900 receiving yards all the way up to 1,303. His yards per target jumping from 9 to 10.1, so the chemistry and efficiency between him and Wilson was definitely improving. This was unfortunately at the expense of the consistency of a longtime player in this wide receiver group, Tyler Lockett. He was producing some of his most inconsistent production of his entire career, really only posting 3 fantasy relevant games, being virtually unstartable in the remainder of them, and I tend to lean in the camp that DK Metcalf's role will continue to be expanded upon. So while I am very high on DK himself, I'm much less bullish on Tyler Lockett this season. While Lockett is still likely to produce near his ADP when it comes to an overall season-long basis, I don't think you can guarantee his week-to-week volume. DK Metcalf, however, I think each and every week, regardless of how much passing production and passing volume there is on Seattle, he's going to get his. He's going to command his targets, and he's going to get his fantasy production. And in those high-end games where Russell Wilson is actually cooking, throwing the ball 30-plus attempts, DK Metcalf is going to be a player with an immense amount of upside. We've seen those high ceiling games from DK Metcalf. He's had a 15 target game against San Francisco, converting that into 12 receptions, 161 yards, and 2 touchdowns. That's right, over 40 fantasy points, and that was against the San Francisco 49ers. Metcalf against any defense has the potential to pop off, and for that reason, that type of upside, it's the type of player I want on my team 10 out of 10 times. Alright guys, we're moving into the 3rd round where I will completely take advantage of this tight end ADP discrepancy. ESPN is the only platform where I will be in this stage of the draft where I can actually grab a player like Darren Waller and George Kittle, who on ESPN are coming off the board as the 36th and 37th player alike. If I were to start out the draft with the 7th overall pick at that draft spot, my 3rd round draft selection would be 31st overall, several spots before both George Kittle and Darren Waller are projected to come off the board. So in ESPN ESPN drafts, two players I certainly could get with my third overall pick. If I'm doing the RB anchor draft strategy, these are two tight ends I definitely want to be targeting. The strength and idea behind this strategy definitely comes to getting an advantage at these other positions like quarterback and tight end, so sacrificing a little bit of depth at the RB position in order to lock in one of these tight ends, it's definitely a trade-off I'm willing to make. One thing I will say though is to monitor the injury currently for Darren Waller. Darren Waller has an undisclosed injury. At this time, we're not sure exactly how serious it is. If you're drafting today, I probably would opt to avoid Darren Waller, maybe go and err in the side of George Kittle. Me personally, I've been much higher on Darren Waller than Kittle throughout this entire offseason, but that's still no excuse to opt to draft an injured Darren Waller over a healthy George Kittle, who if on the field has the upside to compete with even Travis Kelce. But like I said, monitor the injury of Darren Waller, make sure that George Kittle is not injured when you're drafting him. You don't want to take a tight end who's not going to be playing in week 1 or week 2. If that's the case, I'm avoiding those players at that point, opting to draft the other one. And my current preference today of the two would be George Kittle, but only due to the fact that Darren Waller is currently dealing with an injury. Alright guys, to close out this video, we are going to kind of combine the 4th and 5th round because I don't feel strongly that you should have to target a quarterback in the 4th round. I think the 5th round is the earliest range in which you really should be going out of your way to get a top quarterback. When it comes to ESPN ADP though, the only two quarterbacks being drafted within the top 60 picks are Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen. This will allow you to have a bit more flexibility when it comes to your selection for your 4th round pick, which I would suggest targeting either a wide receiver or another running back. If we're sticking fully to the RB anchor draft strategy, we would opt in the side of the wide receiver, but I did just want to outline both potential options if I were to take a wide receiver with the 4th round pick or if I were to draft a running back. If I were to stick with the RB anchor draft strategy, the wide receiver that I would select would be Chris Godwin of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, not a player I've been particularly high on. But when looking at the players that would be available at that draft spot and which players are actually left in the rank and which players are highest in my rankings that are left available, Chris Godwin is at the top of the list. So even though he's not a player that's high on my list of players to target, but with him being the wide receiver 2 for my offense, that is going to alleviate a lot of the pressure that he will have to produce week in and week out. The concerns that we have when it comes to volume and target distribution for this team, they're not going to weigh as heavily on my roster because the expectations in the need for Chris Godwin to produce, it's not going to be as high as other teams who are hammering the running back position, who may need to draft a player like Chris Godwin as their wide receiver 1. Keep in mind though, with the wide receiver position, you can still draft other solid players with depth like Brandon Ayuk and Deontay Johnson in the following rounds if you did want to opt to save some draft capital in a high-end quarterback and potentially look into one of the lower ranking options. I put 2 quarterbacks up on the board that were really high on, one in that elite tier and then a late round player, somebody coming in consistently undervalued that we feel confident can produce. The elite option, obviously, Kyler Murray, a player that we've supported throughout this entire offseason. Even last season, we were one of the highest on Kyler Murray, and prior to him actually sustaining an injury, he was producing to the highest of our expectations. Heading into this season, he's presumably healthy, coming in with more options in the receiving game than ever, more experience under his belt at the NFL level, more comfortability in this offense working with his coaching staff, so all signs are pointing up for Kyler Murray, a player who already produced as an elite option at the quarterback position. If I'm going to invest early round draft capital into a quarterback, he's going to be one of my top targets. But if I'm trying to save face, maybe I don't feel confident with Chris Godwin being my wide receiver 2, and I do want to secure a solid wide receiver 3 like Deontay Johnson or Brandon Ayuk. So instead of opting to draft a player like Kyler Murray, I opt to draft one of those wide receivers instead, or potentially a different running back. In that scenario, I would opt to draft a quarterback in the later stages of the draft, and the player that we're the highest on coming in at a value in the later stages definitely has to be Ryan Tannehill of the Tennessee Titans. Ryan Tannehill quietly throughout his entire tenure as a Tennessee Titan has been producing top 7 quarterback production despite coming in consistently undervalued. Now heading into this season, Ryan Tannehill will not only return with Derrick Henry by his side, but he'll also have AJ Brown and his newest weapon, Julio Jones. Julio Jones has been a premier wide receiver in the league for many years now. It's undeniable having that type of weapon at the disposal of Ryan Tannehill, a player who has proven to produce with the weapons around him, even providing Corey Davis with a breakout season, a player that most of us thought thought would never have an opportunity to break out. It really makes you wonder what Ryan Tannehill can possibly do if this offense completely opens up. Julio Jones is playing at his max level, AJ Brown as well. This could literally be one of the best and potent offenses in the entire league. Certainly going to be one of the most versatile, working in the favor of his efficiency. And with Ryan Tannehill coming off the board in the 9th round in ESPN leagues, that gives you a lot of flexibility in the earlier and middle rounds to secure a lot of those depth pieces that you need for your roster, while also not completely sacrificing the upside at the quarterback position. But guys, that's going to do it for this video. We really hoped you enjoyed. If you did, how about hitting that like button? If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. We thank you all for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.